everyone, welcome to another video. Thank you so much for bearing with me over the past few weeks. I know that I haven't been updating and uploading any videos, but hopefully I will have a few more going through half term to help you guys out. I hope that you are having a great half term so far, and I hope that you guys are managing to stay safe and well at home. Before we do get started, here are a few shout outs for today. So big shout out to Ryan, to Callum, to Gang and Deep, and to Daryl as well. Thank you so much for subscribing. If you have subscribed but you haven't had a shout out, stay tuned to the end of the video where I let you guys know how you can get one. But for now, let's move into our video. So today's video is going to be annotating yet another Taylor Swift website, and I'm really hoping that at the end of this video she doesn't just release a new version or a new album so that I have to annotate it all over again. For those of you who aren't aware, Taylor Swift is one of the options for you guys when you study Component 2 and you do music videos. If you are in Year 11, then you may have already looked at her Lover era website. But if you haven't started studying it yet, then this is probably the website that you guys will be annotating. It doesn't matter in your exam at all which website you analyse of hers, whether you go all the way back to looking at one of her older websites, whether you look at one of her newer versions. It really doesn't matter what the website itself looks like, but I'm trying to keep as up to date as possible for you guys because I know that you will be looking at some of these in your lessons. So let's go through and have a look at what's different and what's the same about this website compared to others that she has released. So the tabs at the top of the home page are part of the web browser and they will open different web pages. We've got the URL again containing breadcrumbs. At the moment you can't see any of those, but as you click on merch, videos, events, newsletter, it would add to that URL bar showing whereabouts in the website that you are. We've also got icons at the top of the page. These conduct a variety of different functions, but that's something that's applicable to basically all websites. For the Taylor Swift website specifically, we have this banner which is textured and at the top of the page. This is very different to other websites that she's had before where the banner itself has been white. This here is almost sepia, and that's really important when we think about the house style, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. Now it stands out from the background as a whole and sort of indicates the house style because you can see that all of the buttons that we've got at different parts of the website so far are all in this same textured style. Now it offers hyperlinks on that banner for further information and allows the user to access this even as they scroll down the page because it follows them as they scroll down the page, so it gives sort of easier navigation. Now, like the Reputation era, all of the fonts here are serif. This suggests formality, but they don't have capital letters, which indicates a sort of innocence. And the typography itself is very similar to that you would find on a typewriter or courier, which adds this old-fashioned traditional feel to the album as a whole. Including social media at the top of this banner also indicates Swift's convergent media presence and suggests a greater level of interactivity with the demographic, particularly because there are so many different kinds of social media that we've got pinpointed at the top of the page here. Product placement, again, as we would expect to see, is right at the very front of this homepage. And remember that this section of the homepage here, this would be the actual home screen. Anything below this line, in fact, I think it's almost sort of here, but anything below this line would be sort of below the scroll. Now this cover art is very similar to the background and to the website, but it's not the cover image of the album itself that forms the background. So unlike the Lover era website where the same image of Taylor Swift on the website can be seen on the cover art for her latest album, that's not quite the case here. It's similar, but it's not quite the same. Now, including a button obviously makes it more likely for audiences to buy the album because we like nothing more than clicking on buttons. But going into the background and the house style as a whole, the background uses selective focus to imply this cold and misty setting. Swift uses indirect mode of address, which again is very similar to the Lover era, but differs from things like Reputation. And it's a long, wide shot, which we've not really had before on a Taylor Swift website. This makes her seem smaller and less of a focus than the music itself. Because everything is very muted, because it's all very traditional and old-fashioned, that might be why we have this sort of sepia-style banner at the top of the page. Sepia being a sort of old-style sort of like copper or brown sort of colour that you might see on old photographs. Again, sort of suggesting tradition or a sort of old-fashioned atmosphere. Now, the fact that Taylor Swift is sort of shown to be much smaller could also represent the fact that this album and this era was created during the lockdown that we had in March, where Swift would have been isolated and would have been on her own, and sort of perhaps emphasising the beauty of nature in a way, given that she's outside and on her own and looking up to the sky. Now, similar to previous eras, specifically Lover, we've got a pattern here where the website is split up into different sections, sort of different blocky sections. And again, we've got synergy with Target, which we saw through the previous era as well. We've also got this red colour. Now, this is interesting for many reasons. One, the Target logo is red, but also it stands out against this muted colour palette and so becomes more of a focus. It's also potentially a link to her previous album, Red, and sort of that particular era, and sort of showing that she's referencing her back catalogue in a way. Now, the second half of the website, again, split up into these different blocky sections. This section here at the top is a sort of scrolling gallery of different media. It's all videos, and the videos themselves are embedded from YouTube, which again adds to this level of convergence. However, the company name Vivo is sort of synergy and showing a collaboration between Taylor Swift and Vivo itself. Now, the thumbnail for the video, again, shows Swift using indirect mode of address, so we've got that as a theme throughout the house style on the website as a whole. And it also makes her look very innocent given the soft lighting that we've got going on in that bottom left-hand side. Obviously, that's a still taken from the video itself, but it's interesting that it's all designed to make her look more innocent and more almost childlike, you could argue. Now, the merchandise section again also reflects the era that it was built in, with muted colour palette and cover art, and the fact that the first piece of merchandise that we see is a cardigan is also quite important because this does link to a song from the album. So we've got a direct link between the merchandise and the album itself, again showing this sort of era or house style or theme running throughout all of the branding and marketing of Taylor Swift. Now, the while stocks last or while supplies last phrase encourages the audience to buy the merchandise quickly because it adds pressure. It implies that this merchandise is time sensitive, despite the fact that it has been up there for months at this point. Now, if we wanted to, we could click on this button, which would take the audience to another part of the website and which would give more detail and options for merchandise as a whole. We also have the option at the bottom of the page which encourages further interactivity by adding them to a mailing list, so you as the audience can sign up to this mailing list. And again, this sort of gives convergence, but it's a more traditional level of convergence than going straight on to Taylor Swift's social media. It's also phrased in a far less personal way than in previous eras. If we were to look at the 1989 website analysis, I'm pretty sure it was that website, the sign-up sheet had a lot of personal pronouns in it and sort of almost felt like Taylor Swift was inviting the audience to join her and to make it really personal, whereas this seems less personal and more like a traditional sign-up sheet that you would find on a website. However, the banner at the bottom, again, this bookends the website because it follows the audience as you're scrolling down the page. This does seem more personal because you have that "Yes, I'm in" button, suggesting that this is something that the audience need to do. And it's also quite pressurizing and forcing the audience to sign up because you can't get rid of that banner unless you click either the little X that's in the bottom right hand corner over here, or unless you click that "Yes, I'm in" button. So in order to get rid of that, you really have to click one of those options, and obviously the "Yes, I'm in" box is center, so it's more likely that you're going to be clicking on that one. A slightly less content heavy version of the website, so we've got less on here than we had in the Lover website, slightly more on here than we had in the Reputation era, so it's sort of, in terms of its content, falls somewhere between the two, but it does also have obviously those additional pages. Now, the additional pages, again, very similar to what we had with the Lover era website. So the merchandise obviously takes the audience to a separate page that has automated galleries to show the range of merchandise. We're looking at primary demographic of 16 to 24-year-old men potentially here, because they're likely to be buying things for either their daughters, their girlfriends, their partners, or, you know, sort of women themselves who perhaps maybe, or girls who may be interested in Taylor Swift. It's just worthwhile knowing and mentioning that the primary demographic for Taylor Swift as a whole is young enough that they're not likely to have the sort of disposable income needed to buy a lot of the merchandise that's on Taylor Swift's page. The videos, again, links to the scrolling gallery of videos which are embedded through YouTube. We're looking at her primary demographic here for this, so 16 to 24-year-old females. The events advertises and informs on the latest tours. There's also links for tickets, but obviously at the moment they're all postponed, or a lot of them are sort of cancelled or postponed until there's more information about what's going to happen with COVID. Again, we're looking at a primary demographic here of women who would attend these tours, but again, the primary demographic for Swift as a whole is not likely to have the level of disposable income needed to buy the tickets themselves, because obviously a 16-year-old is not necessarily going to have, or is more unlikely to have, the level of income needed to buy things like the tickets and the merchandise, which often have high price points. The newsletter at the bottom of the page gives audiences a chance to register for their email address, but it's also a link at the top which would then allow audiences to receive this newsletter through email. Again, likely to be the primary demographic who would be interested in this, although more likely to be at the higher end of this, as I don't think it's a realistic expectation for the 16-year-olds to be reading through an entire newsletter from Taylor Swift. They're more likely to go to her social media to find out that information more quickly. We could also have secondary demographic of parents who may want to stay up to date on information, either to buy the tickets or the merchandise themselves as gifts, or potentially just to stay involved with what their children are doing online and who they're following. Now, differently, or as a sort of addition to the previous pages that we've seen for Taylor Swift before, we've now got an additional option, which is the voting option. Now, Taylor Swift has become far more involved in American politics than she has been previously. This was something that occurred predominantly through the Lover era, or prior to the Lover era. And so by adding in this voting page here, it takes the audience to places that will give them information on how to register to vote, how to send in their vote. And obviously this is going to target specifically an American demographic. It's also going to target a demographic who are 18 plus. Obviously they have to be of an age to vote. And they're going to be both women and men who are anywhere on that ABC scale, although more likely to be A to C1 in order to understand and to take in that information. The audiences may also be any of the other audiences that we've seen for the other pages, although this is applicable to anyone and everyone who can vote in America. Obviously, we've got a certain kind of person who's accessing the Taylor Swift website, so although it's applicable to everyone, you're more likely to get the website demographic themselves going to that page. I hope that makes sense. So we've got quite a few key terms today. If there were things that you didn't understand, maybe go through and have a look and maybe get the definitions for those. Obviously there's a video up taking you to a glossary on the Educast website. If you haven't seen that already, that might be quite useful. Hopefully you found this interesting. Please pop a comment below for anything that you would like to see me make a video on, or if you just have any general comments, questions, ideas, just let me know in the comments section below. If you haven't already, do please subscribe. Every subscription gets themselves a shout out in the next video. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. If you have subscribed and you haven't had your shout out, then please let me know in the comments section below, or through getting in touch with me on social media, either at Twitter through at media_revision, or on Instagram, which is GCSE Media Revision. And I will